My name is Sandra Vale, 29 years old. The ivory silk of my dress pooled behind me like spilled moonlight as I began that long, echoing walk. The cathedral breathed around me, incense and old stone, the organ's melody swelling until it pressed against my ribs like a tide. Stained glass fractured the sun into jewel-toned fragments, scattering them across the marble aisle, as if the floor itself were glinting under some private constellation. I tried to anchor myself to simple things: the cool weight of my bouquet handle against my palm, the faint rasp of fabric as the train whispered over polished stone, the steady warmth of my father's arm where his sleeve brushed mine. "You look breathtaking," he murmured, voice rough with pride. I felt the tremor of it more than I heard it. The words were a tiny miracle laid carefully in my ear. I smiled because I was meant to, because this moment had a choreography older than the two of us, and my job was to step when the music told me to step. I did not let my gaze slip to the front rows where I could sense watching eyes like a low hum. I looked only ahead, toward the altar, toward the man who had promised me forever. Adrien waited under a crown of white roses and baby's breath, the charcoal lines of his tux precise against all that ceremonial bloom. His posture was the way I first loved him, relaxed, elegant, as if gravity had negotiated more gently with him than it did with other people. The light found him and stuck, glancing from the dark sweep of his hair, catching for a second in the green of his eyes. He was smiling. Of course he was smiling. It was a smile I knew, restrained at the edges, a touch of mischief at the corner, the almost imperceptible inhale before he made a joke that would leave me laughing and exasperated. My chest loosened. I could do this. We could do this. We moved past camera flashes, faces blurred into warmth. My mother sat at the front like a candle, steady brightness in her clasped hands and wet eyes. Beside her, Diane, Adrien's mother, held herself with a kind of sculpted grace. Her mouth curved, polite and controlled, but her eyes were another language entirely, one I couldn't translate on the fly. As our gazes met, something cold traced the base of my skull. A flicker, a pinprick, gone so fast I told myself I'd imagined it. I told myself many things in those steps. Dearly beloved, the priest's voice unfurled, ancient as rain. Words moved around us in a ceremonial current. Union, covenant, vow. Adrien's fingers found mine, warm, sure. The pressure steadied me. I listened as he spoke to me in the voice he used when he wanted a hush to fall over a crowded room, soft, deliberate, sincere. His vows were a clean line. I could walk them barefoot without fear of falling. When it was my turn, my voice wobbled once and then held. Sickness and health, richer and poorer, all the old scaffolding that has carried unknown lovers long before we ever thought to pronounce the words. The ring went on. His lips were warm and careful. Applause, light shattering the moment into confetti as we turned toward the aisle. We floated, or I decided to remember it that way. By the time the reception began, a sweetness had settled over everything, a gauze I could press to the day's edges. The ballroom was a fever dream of celebration. Strings in the corner, a champagne fountain that glittered like laughter, tables drowning in orchids. Adrien spun me across the floor too, at last, his cheek brushing my temple. I felt the words in my bones. It didn't matter that the dress was slightly too tight at the ribs, or that my bouquet hand had gone numb, or that the photographer kept angling me toward light that made me blink. I was inside the thing I had wanted. And yet, a tiny draft haunted the seams. I noticed it first in the pauses, those slim, awkward slivers between a compliment and Adrien's reply, the way he checked his watch when he thought no one was looking, the quick, bright flare of a smile that didn't reach his eyes when my father clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Welcome to the family, son." I could feel him leaving, one distracted glance at a time, as though some part of him had already slipped out a side door and was walking quickly down an unlit corridor. Lucille lifted her glass to toast me. Platinum hair, lips painted the soft pink we used to call ballet class, eyes that could do 100 moods in a second. We'd been friends since college, where she used to borrow my sweaters and return them smelling faintly of vanilla. "To Sandra," she said, voice high and precise, and the room cooed obligingly. But the second our eyes locked, something jumped, like a fish breaking water and vanishing again. Her smile felt held together with pins. During the bouquet toss, she stood in the crowd of raised hands and made no move at all, letting the flowers sail overhead, gaze fixed on some invisible point and past my shoulder. My mother-in-law ghosted through clusters of relatives, her hand trailing across sleeves, fingers pinching a nephew's cuff into neatness, her head tilted as she listened. She doesn't whisper, I thought, noticing how her mouth barely moved, and yet everyone leaned in. It wasn't the words that mattered so much as the arrangement of them in the air. A cousin's eyes flicked to Adrien, then back to Diane. A great-aunt looked at me, quickly away, then smoothed her napkin with unnecessary vigor. Each small motion a thread. Taken together, a pattern. Just eager to start our honeymoon, Adrien told me when I teased him about his watch. But the laugh he tacked onto the end was the kind you use when a door doesn't open and you don't want anyone to see you tug harder. The hour grew later, and he grew formal by degrees. His hand at my waist ended in courtesy rather than claim. We should go, he said, lips brushing my cheek, a stage whisper meant to make a bubble around us. Before your father decides we owe 3 more toasts. I nodded, letting myself be swept in the current of farewell hugs, last photos, the obligatory kiss framed by sparklers, raised like a tunnel of constellations. People said things about Paris and croissants and bring us back scandalous stories. The limousine door shut softly behind us, sealing the night like a letter. Adrien's ancestral house waited outside the city, perched on a hill that gathered the dark. From the drive, it looked like a ship docked in a sea of lawn. Gables, black windows, ivy climbing like a patient script across stone. When we stepped inside, the foyer gathered us into a hush. It smelled of beeswax and old books, polished railings and somebody's memory. Portraits lined the walls, men and women with good posture and opinions about the world, framed in gold that flickered under the lamps. Adrien's footfalls echoed, mine skimmed. I had Rosa prepare the master suite, he said, and the sentence came out like he'd practiced it in the car. I threaded my fingers through his. It's beautiful, I said, before I'd seen anything, because the house had that kind of gravity. It insisted on itself, and the only graceful thing to do was agree. The room, when I stepped into it, looked like a picture you see once and then remember all your life. Candles everywhere, breathing little halos into the air. White roses climbing the dressing table, drowning the mirror in soft light. Rose petals mapped across the bed in a careful geography that must have taken someone a quiet hour to arrange. Champagne waiting in a silver ice bucket like a small moon. I exhaled and let the day finally pour through me, all the heat and clatter softening into a low hum. Perfect, I whispered, turning to him. He was there and not there, standing in the doorway, shoulders lit by the corridor's glow, thumb flicking across his phone screen once, twice, again. When he felt me looking, he slid it into his pocket with that cool little sleight of hand men learn in their 20s. Just a quick call, he said, tone easy and too practiced to be entirely honest. Paris reservation thing. 10 minutes, I promise. 10, I repeated, and tried to make it sound like teasing. He kissed my forehead, polite, distracted, and vanished back into the hall. Candles crackle if you listen. It's the smallest, most hopeful sound, like a fingertip tapping the back of your hand to remind you that you're not alone. I let them keep me company. I unclasped the tiny row of buttons down my spine and stepped out of the dress that had carried me all day like a spell. I hung it carefully, almost reverently, the silk warm as breath. The nightgown felt scandalously light after pounds of brocade. I laughed at myself in the mirror because suddenly I looked like a different woman, one who might make impulsive decisions in the middle of the night and never confess them. 10 minutes passed, then 12, then 15. I poured the champagne and watched the bubbles race upward as if they had someplace important to be. The house made old house noises, mild protests of wood and heat, a settling sigh as if it were choosing a side and deciding on mine. When my phone stayed dark, I texted Adrien a simple, "Where did you go?" The message marked as delivered and did nothing else. I told myself reception was bad in Oldstone. that the hotel needed his birth certificate and his second-grade teacher's maiden name and possibly a blood sacrifice to confirm our suite. At 27 minutes, I opened the door and listened. The corridor exhaled a draft that lifted the candle flame behind me. Far off, something like a footstep, but it might have been the house cracking its knuckles. I stepped barefoot into the runner to keep my steps quiet, an irrational instinct that still felt correct. Portraits watched me pass, oil eyes glossy with patience. I tried not to glance back. On our wedding day, the world should move toward the center like a flock returning, but as I moved through the hush, I could feel the center shifting, sliding like a coin under a cup. I found myself thinking of Diane's eyes in the cathedral, how they hadn't matched her smile, how a woman like that might tell the truth and the lie simultaneously and let you decide which to believe. I thought of Lucille's bouquet hands, empty, idle. I wondered about the family stories that get told in houses like this after the guests go home, stories with two versions depending on who is listening. At the turn toward the east wing, a wash of warm light pressed under a closed door farther down, gold thinning along the seam like a secret. I felt it before I heard anything, the knowledge that the next breath I took would separate my life into a before and an after. My hand lifted to touch the wall, steadied by cold plaster. "It's nothing," I said aloud, voice thin and brave. "It's nothing at all." The house held its breath with me. I stood there and listened to the silence until I could hear my pulse in my jaw. Then I took one small step forward, and then another. The hallway yawned wide as if it were waiting to swallow me. I didn't go farther, not yet. I told myself I would give him one more minute. Just one. I returned to the suite, closed the door softly, and forced my body into stillness. My reflection in the mirror looked like a woman rehearsing calm, her hair glossy waves over her shoulders, her nightgown whispering against her skin. A bride waiting for the script to resume. But the script stuttered. 10 more minutes bled away. The champagne dulled, its effervescence dying slow in the glass. I couldn't stand the silence anymore. When Adrien returned at last, his tie loosened, his jaw tense, he wore the expression of a man walking back into a room where the truth had been waiting for him. "Paris sorted?" I asked lightly, though my voice carried the hard edge of someone refusing to beg for reassurance. "Of course," he said. His smile was late to arrive, plastered on like it had been borrowed. He kissed me then, quick, too quick, lips brushing mine like punctuation rather than promise. "Sorry," he added, slipping out of his shoes. "I didn't mean to be gone so long." I searched his face, looking for something, anything, to anchor me. But he gave me polished surfaces, the kind people wear in boardrooms and courtrooms. For the first time since I'd said my vows, I felt lonely. We lay side by side on the bed, the petals pressed against my skin like accusations. Adrien talked about Paris, about museums and wine, about how the driver in the morning would take us to the airport. His voice was a little too high, like he was auditioning for normal. I nodded at all the right moments, though inside me a small unease grew teeth. The next day, breakfast was sunlight and congratulations. The ballroom of the hotel gleamed with silver coffee urns, stacks of pastries, guests in shades of pastel and navy murmuring contentedly over china cups. It should have been a farewell morning, sweetened by promise. Instead, I wore my smile like armor. Adrien glided among the tables, shaking hands, laughing in his deliberate, magnetic way. If charm were a currency, he'd always be rich. But I noticed things. The twitch in his jaw when someone asked about our honeymoon suite. The way his eyes searched the room as though checking who was watching. He introduced me to distant cousins, aunts, colleagues, with a flourish that made me feel like a prized artifact instead of a partner. Lucille breezed in late, sunlight catching the platinum of her hair, her powder blue dress crisp and immaculate. She hugged my mother with easy warmth, took selfies with cousins, pressed her lips to my cheek with a force that was almost theatrical. "You're glowing, Sandra," she whispered. Her perfume, jasmine, sharp and sweet, clung to me longer than the embrace did. I laughed politely, but something in her gaze unnerved me. It was too direct, too steady, as if she was daring me to look closer and see the cracks. The speeches started again, as though the wedding wasn't yet finished feeding on words. Adrien's Uncle Juan raised a toast to the family's legacy, his voice carrying authority. Diane stood briefly, thanking everyone for coming. Her tone was smooth, but her eyes scanned the room, measuring, cataloging. When they landed on me, I felt a chill. Not hostility, something else, like she was waiting to see whether I would pass a test I didn't know I was taking. My father clinked his glass, his pride unrestrained. To Adrien and Sandra, may their union be as enduring as the stones of that cathedral. His voice cracked on the last word, and tears filled his eyes. The guests sighed in unison, touched. I forced myself to smile at Adrien, whose answering grin was polite, almost brittle. Later, during the father-daughter dance, I noticed Adrien standing apart. He was surrounded by cousins and old family friends, yet his eyes weren't on me. He checked his watch again. Always the watch. "You okay?" I asked when I finally returned to him, breathless from the dance floor. "Of course," he replied, but the answer landed wrong, as though it had been rehearsed for another scene altogether. By midnight, guests were thinning. My parents kissed us goodnight, my mother whispering, "Be happy, darling," into my hair. The limousine rolled us up the hill toward Adrien's ancestral house once more. The mansion loomed larger in the dark than it had in daylight. The trees clawed at the moonlight. The windows gleamed like eyes that didn't blink. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the car and wondered how many brides before me had climbed those stairs, how many had felt the weight of history settle around their throats. Inside, the foyer glowed dimly, shadows gathering in corners. Adrien's hand was steady on my back as he guided me toward the staircase. "Everything's ready for tonight," he said with a strange formality, like a host showing a guest to her quarters. The master suite unfolded like a dream, staged for photographs, rose petals, champagne, candles, silk sheets turned down just so. I gasped because the beauty was undeniable. "It's perfect," I whispered, letting gratitude soften me. But Adrien was already pulling out his phone again, brows knit. "Just one call," he muttered, and before I could ask what could possibly matter more than this moment, he was gone. Alone, I touched the petals, lifted the champagne flute, tried to let the room's romance wash over me. Yet the emptiness beside me on the bed shouted louder than the silence. Every flicker of candlelight seemed to stretch the shadows longer. Minutes dissolved into half an hour. I told myself it was nothing, that nerves made men restless too, that he loved me, always had, always would. But when the grandfather clock downstairs began its solemn chime, I couldn't stay still. I rose, padded to the door, and pressed my ear against it. The house groaned, sighed. And then, a faint sound, so soft I thought I'd imagined it. A rhythmic creak, low and deliberate, seeping from the east wing. My skin prickled, the champagne turned bitter in my mouth. I stepped into the hall. The sconces sputtered, throwing weak pools of light that left long stretches in shadow. The portraits of Adrien's ancestors seemed to tilt as I passed, their painted eyes following. I told myself I was imagining things, but my pulse hammered louder than my footsteps. The creaking continued, joined now by muffled voices. Urgent, intimate, too intimate. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But I walked forward, toward the seam of golden light leaking from beneath Diane's sweet door. I lifted my hand, hovering over the knob. One turn, I thought. One turn, and my entire life might collapse. My hand hovered over the doorknob, but I couldn't move. The brass looked too cold, too final. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out every rational thought. I told myself it was the house again. Its old bones creaking, its drafty corridors carrying voices where there were none. But then came a sound no imagination could invent. A breathless laugh, high and soft, the kind only intimacy pulls from a throat. I stumbled back, pressing myself against the opposite wall. My knees trembled so hard they scraped the plaster. This couldn't be real. Not tonight. Not after everything I had promised, everything I had believed. For long minutes, I stood frozen in the corridor, listening. The creaking grew more rhythmic, the voices clearer. A man's murmur, a woman's sigh, words smudged by the door's heavy wood. I wanted to turn away, to retreat into ignorance, but ignorance was already breaking apart inside me. My body knew what my mind still rejected. I forced myself closer. My hand touched the knob. The metal bit into my palm, cold as betrayal itself. The door opened without a sound. Candlelight spilled out, painting the suite in shifting gold. My eyes caught the bed first, a massive four-poster, sheets tangled, two bodies moving as one. The scene burned itself into me faster than I could look away. Adrien's broad shoulders bent over another figure, his wedding ring flashing as his hand traced the curve of her waist. Her hair spread in a golden fan across the pillows. A woman's hand reached up, nails grazing his back with the familiarity of long practice. Lucille, my best friend, my maid of honor. The woman who had zipped my wedding dress only hours earlier, who had whispered, "You're the luckiest bride I know," into my ear as she adjusted my veil. Her lips now parted under Adrien's, her body arching to meet him. I staggered forward, the sound that tore from me halfway between a sob and a gasp. Both their heads snapped toward me. Adrien's eyes widened, passion curdling instantly into shock. Lucille clutched the sheets to her chest, her cheeks scarlet. "Sandra," Adrien breathed, my name falling from his lips like a curse. I stepped fully into the room. My nightgown brushed against my legs, soft, obscene in its innocence. My voice shook, then hardened. "Explain." Adrien slid from the bed, fumbling with his trousers, his expression shifting rapidly. Guilt, calculation, something almost like annoyance. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. "Not what it looks like? You're in bed with my best friend on our wedding night. What does it look like, Adrien?" Lucille's voice trembled, pitiful. "Sandra, please, you don't understand." "Oh, I understand," I snapped, turning my fury on her. "You smiled in my face. You stood beside me at the altar. And now you're here. How long? Tell me how long." Her lips quivered. She looked at Adrien, desperate for him to speak. But he only buttoned his shirt, his silence as damning as any confession. "How long?" I demanded, my voice cracking. 2 years, Lucille whispered, each syllable a knife. "Since before he proposed." My world tilted. The cathedral, the vows, the ring on my finger, all of it fractured into something grotesque. Adrien reached towards me. "Sandra, listen. I love you. I do. But things are complicated." "Complicated?" My laugh was hollow, sharp. "What's complicated about betrayal? About lies? About making a fool of me in front of everyone I love?" He set his jaw, his eyes flashing with something darker. "You wouldn't understand. We needed—" "The money," I finished, the words tasting like ash. His silence confirmed it. "You planned this," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "You met me at that gala on purpose. You knew about my grandmother's trust fund. You used me." Lucille flinched. Adrien didn't. His expression smoothed into something I recognized too well. Businesslike, detached, as if I were a contract he was renegotiating. "This is my house," he said quietly, his voice carrying a new, dangerous weight, "and you will not raise your voice in it." My breath caught. That single sentence told me more than all his vows ever had. I wasn't his bride. I was his possession. I steadied myself, though my insides screamed. "You've destroyed everything. My love, my trust, my future. For what? For a trust fund you could have asked me for. For her." I pointed at Lucille, who shrank deeper into the sheets. "My friend." Adrien's eyes flicked toward the door, calculating. Lucille muttered, "She wasn't supposed to find out." I laughed again, this time broken. "And that makes it better?" The three of us stood suspended in that golden-lit nightmare, me trembling with rage, Lucille clutching fabric like a shield, Adrien smoothing his shirt, his gaze sharpening with each second into something cold, almost feral. The silence pressed hard, brittle. And then, from behind me, another voice cut the air clean in half. "Enough!" I turned. Diane stood in the doorway, perfectly dressed in black, as though she'd been waiting for this moment all along. Her eyes glittered, sharp as shattered glass. Diane's presence froze the room more effectively than any slammed door could. She stepped inside with the precision of someone who had rehearsed her entrance, her heels striking the floor like punctuation. The candlelight flared against her pearl earrings, against the sharp line of her jaw. Adrien's breath hitched. "Mother." "Don't," she said, raising a hand. Her voice was calm, low, but edged with the kind of authority that could peel paint. "I've heard enough." The silence that followed was unbearable. Even the candles seemed to hesitate in their burning. I stood there, trembling, heart ricocheting against my ribs, unsure whether I was grateful for her intrusion or terrified of what it meant. Diane's gaze shifted to me briefly, softening just slightly, before she let it rest coldly on her son. "You brought disgrace into this house," she said, each word measured, "on the very night meant to honor your vows. Do you realize the depth of your shame?" Adrien squared his shoulders, grasping for control. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Diane snapped, her composure cracking like ice over deep water. You married this woman for her inheritance. You carried on with her friend under my roof. And you thought you could keep it hidden. Lucille whimpered, clutching the sheet tighter. Mrs. Vale, please. Diane's head turned slowly, her dark eyes pinning Lucille where she sat. Don't speak. The weight of the words pressed Lucille into silence instantly. Adrien stepped forward, his voice rising. It isn't like that. We love each other. We just... Love? My voice broke, raw and jagged. You call this love? Sneaking behind my back for 2 years? Planning to steal from me? Adrien's mouth tightened, but he didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Diane exhaled sharply, her lips curling with contempt. Pathetic. You are no son of mine. That landed like a gunshot. Adrien blinked, as if the words had struck him physically. You don't mean that. I mean every syllable, Diane said, her voice colder now, clinical. You are finished here. The house, the land, the business, all of it remains in my name. You inherit nothing, not after this. Adrien's face drained of color. You can't... I already have. She reached into her clutch and produced a folded document, placing it carefully on the dresser. The will was changed weeks ago. You get nothing. Not a cent. Not a brick of this estate. You have until sunrise to remove yourself and your belongings. For a moment, all I could hear was the rush of my own breath. The betrayal of Adrien's affair had already gutted me, but this revelation, that Diane had suspected enough to prepare for it, twisted something deeper. You knew, I whispered, my voice shaking. You knew this could happen. Diane's gaze met mine, softened, and for a second I glimpsed something almost like sorrow. I suspected, she admitted. I prayed I was wrong. I hoped my son had more honor than this. Adrien turned on her, his voice venomous. You betrayed me, your own blood. Diane didn't flinch. You betrayed yourself. Lucille slid off the bed, fumbling for her dress on the chair. Tears streaked her face, but they looked more like fear than regret. Where are you going? Adrien hissed at her, the veneer of charm finally shattered. Out, Lucille muttered. She said I wasn't supposed to be here. You're not going anywhere, Adrien barked, grabbing her wrist. Let her go, Diane commanded, her voice iron. If she's smart, she'll be gone before the police are called. Adrien hesitated, then released Lucille with a shove. She stumbled, clutching her clothes, her face burning with humiliation as she fled toward the hallway. Oh, yeah. And then it was just the three of us, Diane, Adrien, and me, in the suffocating glow of those flickering candles. Adrien's chest heaved, his eyes darting between me and his mother. You can't do this. You can't take everything from me. Diane's laugh was sharp, humorless. I gave you everything. You wasted it. Now you will learn what it means to stand with nothing. He turned toward me then, his expression shifting, softening, desperate. Sandra, please. I made a mistake. I was stupid, selfish. But I love you. You have to believe that. The words stung worse than the silence. Don't say you love me. Love doesn't look like this. My voice cracked, but it held. You took the most sacred promise and turned it into a scheme. You destroyed me. Adrien stepped closer, his eyes shining, but I stepped back. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked small, cornered, stripped of the effortless charm he always wielded. I can change, he whispered, if you'll just give me... No, I cut him off, the word sharp enough to slice the air. You've had enough chances. I have nothing left to give. Diane laid a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. Her voice was low, meant only for me. You don't have to face this alone. Something in her tone rooted me, gave me the strength to hold Adrien's gaze. Get out, I said, my voice trembling but strong. Both of you, out of my life. Adrien opened his mouth, but no words came. His jaw clenched, his fists curled, but he said nothing. The silence was his confession. And then Diane spoke once more, final and absolute. At sunrise, you're gone. The room went still again, heavy with endings. The silence after Diane's decree was so sharp it hummed. Adrien's face flickered through a dozen emotions. Shock, fury, calculation, a thin veneer of pleading that cracked too fast to convince anyone. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, as if he were trying to grip a future that had already slipped through his fingers. This is my house, he said finally, his voice trembling between defiance and desperation. Diane's eyes were merciless. No, Adrien, it's mine. It always has been. Did you really think I would entrust our ancestral estate to a man who gambles with love and loyalty like dice on a table? His jaw dropped, the bravado faltering. You can't mean this. Oh, I mean every word. Diane's tone cut cleaner than glass. You've disgraced yourself and you've disgraced me. The will has been rewritten. As of tonight, you inherit nothing. Adrien staggered as if she had struck him. Nothing? You heard me, she said. Not the house, not the land, not a penny of the investments. You've proven you can't be trusted with anything of value, least of all a family legacy. I stood between them, my nightgown trembling against my skin as if it wanted to crawl away from this scene. The fire of betrayal still burned in my chest, but now another sensation spread, a strange relief, as though Diane's words had sliced the rope that had tethered me to Adrien's control. Adrien turned to me then, eyes wide, his face pale with disbelief. Sandra, tell her she can't do this. Tell her I'm your husband. The word felt like poison in my ears. Husband. How quickly it had soured. You forfeited the right to call yourself that, I said, my voice breaking. Whatever you were to me ended when I opened that door. Lucille had reappeared in the hallway, clutching her dress to her chest, eyes swollen from tears. She stood frozen, like a thief caught in the act, waiting for judgment. Diane turned to her slowly, her gaze sharp as knives. Collect your belongings, she said. You have 5 minutes to leave this house. If you're still here when the clock strikes the quarter hour, I'll have security escort you out. Lucille's breath hitched. Please, Mrs. Vale, 5 minutes. Diane's voice left no space for appeal. Lucille's shoulders sagged. She scurried down the corridor, shame trailing her like smoke. Adrien's voice rose in panic. You'd throw me out like a stranger? Your own blood? You've already made yourself a stranger, Diane answered. Her hands were still, clasped neatly before her, but her voice quaked with cold fire. I've given you chance after chance. You spat on every one of them. Tonight is the last. Adrien shook his head, his eyes frantic now. I can fix this. I'll end it with Lucille. I'll... End it? I cut in, my fury boiling over. You've been with her for 2 years, while planning our wedding, while telling me I was your everything. He flinched, but I didn't stop. Every kiss, every promise, every word, you rehearsed them like lines in a play while she waited for you backstage. Was any of it real, Adrien? Any of it at all? His silence was a wound that confirmed the truth. Diane's voice softened as she looked at me, the ice melting just slightly. Child, you are not the fool here. He is, and she is. Don't let their treachery define your worth. Her words steadied me. For the first time since stepping into this nightmare, I felt the ground under my feet again. Adrien's desperation collapsed into bitterness. His voice dropped, low and venomous. You'll regret this, both of you. You think you're strong, but you're nothing without me. I stared at him, hollow. No, Adrien, I'm nothing with you. The words hit him harder than I expected. His shoulders slumped, and for a flicker of a second, I thought I saw genuine pain in his eyes, but it was too late. Diane stepped forward, her voice final. You have until sunrise. After that, you'll be trespassing. Adrien swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. He looked at me one last time, eyes glassy with something between hatred and pleading. Sandra, he whispered. I shook my head. Leave. The room seemed to collapse around us. The candles guttered low, the shadows thickened, and the silence pressed like stone. Adrien backed away slowly, his figure shrinking in the dim corridor. The door closed behind him with a hollow thud. I collapsed onto the bed, the petals now cold and limp against my skin. My chest heaved, my body racked with sobs I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. Diane remained beside me, silent, her presence steady as a pillar. Finally, she said, You've lost nothing of value tonight. You've been freed. I looked at her through blurred vision, wondering if she believed her own words, or if she was just trying to save me from drowning. I sat there on the edge of the bed, shoulders shaking, the petals sticking to my damp skin like accusations. Everything around me seemed grotesque now, the roses reeking of decay, the champagne mocking in its untouched flutes, the candles flickering like eyes that had seen too much. Adrien's footsteps faded down the corridor, swallowed by the house's old silence. The sound should have felt like victory, but instead it hollowed me out further. The man I had believed was my future had vanished into the dark, and all that remained was ruin. Diane's hand rested lightly on my shoulder. It was startling, gentle, almost maternal. "Breathe, child," she whispered. "You are stronger than you know." "I don't feel strong," I rasped. "I feel broken, like everything was a lie." Her gaze was steady. "He lied. You didn't. That distinction matters." I shook my head. "It doesn't change the humiliation. Tomorrow everyone will expect smiles, laughter, a honeymoon send-off, and my voice cracked. "How do I walk into that ballroom and pretend?" "You don't," Diane said, the steel returning to her tone. I blinked at her. "What do you mean?" She straightened, her silhouette sharp against the candlelight. "You don't play defense anymore. You play offense." Her words landed like a foreign language, one I wanted to understand but couldn't yet translate. "Offense?" I asked. "Yes," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "Adrien and Lucille thought they could use secrecy as their weapon. They believed you would stay quiet, ashamed, while they profited from your silence. But shame is not yours to carry. It is theirs, and tomorrow you return it to them." The idea horrified me. "You want me to tell everyone, in front of my parents, my family?" "Better they hear it from you than whispers in corridors," Diane said. "And better to scorch their lies in daylight than let them grow in shadows." I stood pacing, my bare feet silent on the rug. "But if I speak, I destroy everything. The illusion of the perfect wedding, the perfect marriage." "Child," Diane interrupted, her eyes burning. "That illusion was destroyed the moment you opened that door. The only thing left is truth. And truth, however ugly, can be wielded." Her certainty rattled me. "Why are you helping me?" I asked suddenly. She was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Because you deserve better than my son. And because I've watched him become a man I no longer recognize. Tonight he crossed a line even I cannot excuse." Her voice cracked on the last sentence, a fissure in her usually impenetrable armor. For the first time I saw the cost in her eyes, the grief of a mother who had just disowned her child. "He was my boy," she whispered. "Once. But now he is something else." I felt a pang of sympathy that shocked me. Even in my devastation, I recognized the tragedy of her loss. Adrien had betrayed me, but he had also betrayed the woman who raised him. The grandfather clock struck 1. Its solemn chimes vibrated through the walls. Diane rose gracefully. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult." But I couldn't rest. Not yet. My body was exhausted, but my mind was a storm of images. Adrien's ring, glinting in the candlelight, Lucille's flushed face turning toward mine, Diane's icy verdict. When Diane left me alone, I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. The house groaned around me, its old timbers sighing like ghosts. Every sound felt amplified, the drip of wax, the faint rustle of ivy against the windows, the echo of voices replaying endlessly in my skull. Finally, near dawn, exhaustion dragged me into a shallow, haunted sleep. I woke to pale light streaming through heavy curtains. The petals were crushed beneath me, stained darker where my tears had fallen. My gown still hung neatly on its hook, absurdly untouched, as though it belonged to someone else entirely. Diane entered quietly, her composure immaculate. She carried a tray with coffee and toast. "Eat," she said simply. "I can't," I murmured. "You can," she replied, setting the tray on the bedside table. "You'll need strength. This morning everyone expects to see a bride. Instead, they will see the truth. But you must be steady." I sat up slowly, my body aching, as though I'd been in a battle. Perhaps I had. "What if I can't do it?" I whispered. Her gaze was unyielding. "Then Adrien and Lucille win. They walk away untouched while you carry the scars alone. Do you want that?" I swallowed hard, the bitterness of coffee scalding my tongue as I forced a sip. "No." "Good," Diane said, nodding once. "Then you will speak, and when you do, they will never recover from it." Later that morning, as the carriage waited to take us to the hotel, I stood before the mirror in a plain black dress. My wedding ring sat abandoned on the nightstand, a useless circle of metal. I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying my breath. "Ready?" Diane asked from the doorway. "No," I admitted. She gave the faintest smile. "That's how you know you're prepared. Courage doesn't come dressed in certainty, child. It comes trembling, and it comes anyway." I nodded. And together, we stepped into the waiting day. The ballroom smelled of coffee and sugared pastries, a cheerful perfume that clashed cruelly with the weight pressing in my chest. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, gilding the tables where guests sat chatting, laughter bubbling easily as though last night's vows had sealed a perfect fairy tale. I paused at the entrance, Diane just behind me, her hand light on my elbow. "Steady," she murmured. I nodded, though my pulse thundered. Adrien was already working the room, radiant in his tailored travel suit. His voice carried, smooth and confident, as he clasped hands and traded jokes. He looked every bit the adored groom, and for a brief, nauseating second, I almost believed the illusion myself. Lucille arrived moments later, gliding in with the poise of someone convinced the mask still held. Her powder blue dress shimmered under the chandeliers. She hugged relatives, kissed cheeks, even laughed with my college friends as though nothing had happened. I watched from the shadow of a column, fingers twisting the hem of my black dress. No veil, no jewelry, no ring. Just me stripped of the costume they expected. A clink of silver against glass silenced the room. Adrien stood at the front, raising his flute, smile practiced and warm. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us again this morning. Yesterday was the most beautiful day of my life, to marry the woman of my dreams, surrounded by all of you. He paused, eyes glistening with rehearsed emotion. There's no greater joy. The crowd sighed and murmured approval. My mother dabbed her eyes. My father's chest swelled with pride. They were still in the story, still believing. But Lucille's gaze had found me. Her face drained of color. She leaned toward Adrien, whispering something urgent. His smile faltered, just barely, before he smoothed it back into place. His eyes darted, searching, and then found me. It was time. I stepped from behind the pillar, heels clicking against the polished floor, conversations hushed, faces turning. At first, people smiled, expecting a glowing bride, but as they took in my black dress, my bare left hand, the absence of light in my eyes, the smiles dimmed. Sandra, my mother called, relief and delight in her voice. There's our beautiful bride. I kissed her cheek, murmuring, I love you. And then I kept walking, every step deliberate, carrying me to Adrien's side. His smile had grown taut, strained. Darling, he said through clenched teeth, what are you doing? I faced the crowd, letting my voice carry. Yesterday, I thought I was marrying the man of my dreams. I thought I was beginning the greatest adventure of my life. Murmurs of agreement rippled across the room. Smiles returned, expectant. But last night, I continued, my voice hardening, I learned the truth. A silence fell, so complete it rang in my ears. Adrien's hand twitched at his side. Sandra, please, he hissed under his breath. Don't. I turned to him, letting every ounce of my fury burn visible. Can we work out the fact that you spent our wedding night in bed with my best friend? The room erupted. Gasps, sharp cries, chairs scraping against the floor. My father surged to his feet, face dark with rage. My mother's hand flew to her chest as if she'd been shot. Lucille shrank against the wall, her face ashen. Adrien's voice pitched loud over the chaos. That's not true. You don't understand what you saw. I understand perfectly, I cut in, my voice slicing like a blade. You and Lucille have been having an affair for 2 years. 2 years. While you courted me, while you proposed, while you planned this wedding. The crowd erupted again, shouts, curses, disbelief. Relatives stood, demanding answers. My father lunged forward, barely restrained by my uncles. Sandra, stop, Adrien begged, his mask slipping into desperation. We can fix this. No, I said firmly. There is no fixing betrayal planned this carefully. You didn't just betray me. You mocked me, used me, stole from me, all for money. My words rang against the high ceilings like a verdict. I turned then, locking eyes with Lucille. Would you like to tell them, Lucille, or shall I? Her lips quivered. Please. 2 years, I announced. They plotted together for 2 years, and I was foolish enough to trust them both, my husband and my maid of honor. The silence that followed was poisonous. Then the shouting began. Guests recoiling from Adrien, whispers cutting through the air like knives, Lucille's parents weeping in shame. Adrien reached for my arm, but I recoiled. Don't touch me, I said coldly. Don't speak to me. Don't ever come near me again. I faced the crowd once more, voice steady. This betrayal says nothing about love or marriage in general. It says everything about the character of two people who chose greed over honesty. My gaze swept from Adrien to Lucille, pinning them both. You deserve each other. And with that, I walked out of the ballroom, heels striking like war drums, leaving the wreckage of my old life behind me. The air outside the ballroom was cooler, thinner, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath until I left. My chest heaved, but I kept walking, ignoring the startled staff who froze with trays in their hands as I passed. Behind me, the sounds of chaos bled faintly through the doors. My father shouting, relatives demanding explanations, Adrien trying to salvage what could not be salvaged. By the time I reached the street, Diane was waiting beside the car. She didn't speak, didn't need to. She simply opened the door for me and let me collapse inside. For the first time in 24 hours, I allowed myself to cry. Not silent, restrained tears, but a torrent that shook me until my body ached. Diane sat across from me, her expression composed, but her eyes weighted with something softer than pity. When I could finally breathe again, she said, "The hardest part is over." I wasn't sure I believed her. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal filings and icy phone calls. Adrien had moved quickly, after our engagement, to entangle himself in my finances. My grandmother's trust fund, the one I had foolishly placed in his control, was already partially transferred into accounts with his name on them. But Diane moved faster. Her lawyers descended like hawks, unearthing every paper, every signature, every loophole he thought he had hidden. Within weeks, the accounts were frozen, the funds clawed back, penalties and interest added until Adrien's fragile business cracked under the weight. I went to the courthouse once, just once, to watch him sit at the defendant's table, his once proud posture collapsed into a slump. He didn't look at me, not once. Lucille sat in the back, sunglasses hiding her eyes, her hands shaking as she twisted a tissue to shreds. The judge's ruling was decisive. Every cent returned, every document voided, Adrien barred from further claim. My relief was sharp, but it didn't taste like victory. It tasted like ashes. The world I thought I knew unraveled in other ways too. Lucille's family disowned her, unable to reconcile the daughter they loved with the betrayal she had chosen. Adrien's relatives cut ties, furious at the humiliation he'd dragged their name into. I, meanwhile, was left with silence. Friends who had once filled my weekends with laughter now kept their distance, unsure of what to say. Some looked at me with pity, others with fascination, as though I were a character in a scandal they couldn't stop gossiping about. I retreated to my apartment in the city. Therapy became my anchor. Work became my refuge. Slowly, piece by piece, I rebuilt myself. I learned to sit with my grief instead of running from it. I learned that survival wasn't about feeling strong. It was about breathing, one day at a time, until strength came back on its own. There were nights when loneliness threatened to drown me, when I stared at the ceiling and wondered if Adrien's words would haunt me forever. But there were also mornings when I woke to the light filtering through my curtains and felt for just a heartbeat, free. 6 months passed. One evening, as I was making tea, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number lit the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Sandra," the voice said. "It's Juan, Adrien's uncle." I hadn't spoken to him since the wedding. "Hello," I said cautiously. "I thought you should know," he continued, his tone clipped. "What's become of Adrien and Lucille?" I almost ended the call. I had spent months clawing my way back to stability, avoiding every whisper of them. But something in Juan's voice held me. "Go on," I said. "They're destroying each other," he said flatly. "Without your money, without family support, they've collapsed. Adrien's business is gone. He's been drinking heavily, barely holds down odd jobs. Lucille works retail, miserable. They live in a cramped apartment, fighting constantly. Police have been called twice." I closed my eyes. A part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, justice, but instead a hollow ache spread through me. "They deserve each other," I murmured. Juan paused. "They do, but I thought you should know. Their suffering is theirs now. It no longer belongs to you." After the call, I sat in my quiet kitchen, the steam from my tea curling like a ghost. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt empty. Their downfall didn't stitch my wounds closed. Their misery didn't lighten mine. I realized then that healing couldn't come from watching them suffer. Healing had to come from me, choosing every day not to let their betrayal define the rest of my life. So I poured the tea, drank it slowly, and whispered to myself, "You are more than what they tried to break." And for the first time, I believed it might be true. 2 years later, the scars had softened into something I could live with. They hadn't vanished. Betrayal leaves its handwriting on the soul, but they no longer dictated every thought. I had carved out a life of my own again, steady and quiet. That was when I met David. He wasn't dazzling the way Adrien had been. He didn't sweep into rooms or make hearts race with the weight of his attention. David was steady. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He noticed when I fell silent and gave me space instead of filling it with noise. Where Adrien had demanded to be adored, David simply wanted to know me. We took it slow. Pain makes you cautious, and he never pushed. When I told him my story, the cathedral, the suite, the door I never should have opened, he didn't flinch or pity me. He said only, "I'm glad you survived it." That was all. Simple. Honest. Over months, then years, I learned to trust again. Not blindly, not the way I had before. This time it was deliberate, brick by brick, built on transparency and patience. 2 years to the week of my ruined wedding, David proposed on a quiet beach at sunset. No orchestration, no audience. Just us, the tide brushing our feet, his hands trembling as he slipped a modest ring onto my finger. "I don't want perfect," he said. "I want real, with you." I said yes. Our wedding was small, just family and friends who had proven themselves true. Diane was there, unexpectedly, dressed in a slate gown, her eyes soft when she hugged me. In the wreckage Adrien left, she had become a strange kind of ally, even a mentor. My parents beamed, cautious at first, but warming quickly to David's steady kindness. The reception glowed with laughter under string lights, music soft and unpretentious. When David and I danced, his hand steady on my waist, I thought, this is what love is supposed to feel like. And then I saw him, a figure at the edge of the garden, just beyond the fence, thin, haggard, his clothes rumpled, his face drawn. Adrien. For a heartbeat, the world blurred. Memories slammed back, rose petals on a bed, Lucille's laugh, Diane's voice like a blade. My breath caught. "I'll be right back," I whispered to David. He followed my gaze, jaw tightening, but he nodded. "Do you want me with you?" "No," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. "This is mine to finish." I walked across the grass, each step measured. Adrien didn't move. He looked like a ghost, his eyes hollow but burning with something I couldn't name. "Sandra," he rasped when I stopped just out of reach. His voice was cracked, broken. "You look beautiful, happy." "Thank you," I said simply. We stood in silence, the sounds of music and laughter floating behind me like another world. "I came to apologize," he said finally. "I know it's too late. I know nothing I say matters, but I needed you to hear me say it. I'm sorry, for all of it." I studied his face. The charm was gone, the calculation stripped away. What remained was ruin. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who had betrayed me, but as a human crushed beneath his own choices. "What happened to Lucille?" I asked quietly. His eyes clouded. "She left me, said she couldn't stand the sight of me anymore. I have no one, no family, no friends, no work, nothing." He laughed bitterly, the sound cracking into a sob. "Consequences." "Yes," I said softly, "consequences." He stepped closer, desperation in his gaze. "But what I felt for you, it became real. Maybe it started as a plan, but somewhere along the way, I loved you. I swear it." I looked at him, and to my surprise, I felt nothing. No rage, no grief, just peace. "It doesn't matter," I said. He blinked. "What?" "Whether it was real or not. It doesn't matter anymore." His mouth opened, then closed. Confusion, hope, despair chased each other across his face. "I forgive you," I continued, and I realized it was true. "Not for you, for me. Carrying anger poisoned me. I won't let it anymore." His lips trembled. "Does that mean—" "It means nothing except that I'm free," I said firmly. "I hope you find a way to live better than this. But it won't be with me." Tears shimmered in his eyes. "You're really happy," he whispered, wonder breaking through the ruin. "Yes," I said, glancing back toward the lights where David waited. "With him. With myself." Adrien bowed his head. For a moment, I thought he might collapse. But when he lifted his gaze again, I saw something different there. Not hope, not anger, just resignation. "Goodbye, Sandra," he said. "Goodbye, Adrien." I turned and walked back across the grass. David met me halfway, his arms open, his eyes searching mine. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," I said, and I meant it. Years later, I heard Adrien had found work at a counseling center, helping others rebuild after addiction. Whether it was true or not, I never cared to confirm. His story was no longer mine. Because mine didn't end in betrayal or even revenge. It ended in peace. In love, the real kind. The kind that heals instead of harms, that builds instead of breaks, that chooses you not for your wealth, but for who you are. And it ended with me discovering what Adrien could never take, that betrayal hadn't broken me. It had revealed how unbreakable I truly was.